Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those who have joined us from Belgium and other parts of Europe. Thank you for joining us today in the second of the 3 episodes of the Imagine the Future Beyond the COVID-19 Pandemic, India-Europe Thought Leadership Series, which is a joint initiative of the Port of Antwerp and CII. My name is Malini and I represent the Port of Antwerp in India. The topic for today's interaction is business during the COVID-19 pandemic and India's engagement with Europe. For those of you who don't know, the Port of Antwerp is not only a leading economic actor in Belgium, and more broadly Europe, of course. We are one of the largest ports in the world, offering a gateway to companies engaged in international trade via ocean. This has been an interesting month in Belgium. After a wait of over 1.5 years, Belgium elected Mr. Alexander De Croo as the new Prime Minister. For those of you who are closely associated and friends of the Port of Antwerp, you would know about our yearly tradition of the annual reception every February in Mumbai, where we have a chief guest who is always a noteworthy person from Belgium, representing either government or the private sector. In 2017, Mr. De Croo was the chief guest of our reception. What I'm actually trying to imply is that the Port of Antwerp is constantly striving to add value to our network by exposing or linking you with extremely high-level government and business representatives. Today's interaction is exactly a step in that direction, where we have participation from 2 high-profile personalities from India and Europe. I cannot wait to hear from them, but first let me introduce you to our moderator, who is a well-known face by now in India, given that he's been traveling to India for a decade, or more actually. So it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Luc Arnouts, Vice President, International Relations and Network, Antwerp Port Authority. Over to you, Luc.
Thank you so much, Malini. A good morning and a good afternoon to you all. A warm welcome from Antwerp and from Brussels to India, and a warm welcome from India to Belgium and Europe. As you said, Malini, Port of Antwerp, as a leading economic actor and a frontrunner in community building, took this initiative for a 3-episode high-level webinar series on the EU-India thought leadership. And we organized this seminar in association with the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. A word of thanks already to them again. We hope to spread a sentiment of enthusiasm during these online discussions with leading personalities, especially in these challenging pandemic days. And following the overwhelming response to the inaugural webinar of the series with high-profile government diplomats, those who were present will remember Ambassador Santos and Ambassador Hugo Astuto. We now move on to the second episode, which focuses on the private sector and is titled Talking to Private Sector Experts on Conducting Business During the COVID-19 Pandemic and India's Engagement Strategy with Europe. And we have 2 remarkably interesting and appropriate speakers with us today, each of whom has a vivid experience with Indo-European business engagements. And please allow me to introduce them to you. I will, of course, start with the lady, Ms. Luisa Santos. She is a Deputy Director General at Business Europe, where she is responsible for international relations, and she is also the chair of the Business Europe's EU-UK Task Force. Evidently, in these days, we cannot have a webinar without mentioning Brexit. She was a member of the TTIP Advisory Group. TTIP, you will remember, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership between the United States and the EU, and is now a member of the expert group on EU trade agreements of the European Commission. And her principal experience is in trade and the textile sector, having acted first as the chief representative for the Portuguese textile industry in Brussels, later as a trade and industry manager for Euratex, the European Apparel and Textile Confederation. She was also the manager responsible for international partnerships, and this is interesting, including a joint venture in India for a leading Portuguese textile company. Very welcome, Ms. Santos. We are happy you are with us this morning to Europe, this afternoon to India. Mr. Dinesh is the fourth generation TVS family member, the managing director of TVS Supply Chain Solutions, and the joint managing director of TVS Sundram Iyengar and Sons. The TVS Group employs over 60,000 people around the world. Mr. Dinesh has been elected as the chairman of India's foremost industry association, with whom we liaise so pleasantly, the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII National Committee. He's on the CII Institute of Logistics Advisory Council for 2020-21, and he was also on the CII National Committee on Shipping and Logistics for 2019 and 2020. Mr. Dinesh is also the past chairman of the CII Southern Region. And with accolades behind him, such as Entrepreneur of the Year and Next Gen Entrepreneur, Mr. Dinesh is referred as a game changer within the fraternity. His company employs in India alone 20,000 strong workforce, and for instance, in the UK, more than 2,500 jobs. Mr. Dinesh has been instrumental in expanding his company's operations globally, and he set up subsidiaries in many countries like Sri Lanka, United Kingdom, Spain, Germany, Thailand, United States, and I can continue for a while. And we hope after this webinar, Mr. Dinesh, you will add Belgium to that list of subsidiaries that you have created. We thank you in advance, of course. So both our speakers today, representing the private sector, have very strong connections with India and Europe. They are the right people to appear here in our EU-India Thought Leadership webinar. And I hope that our audience has questions. Please put them in the Q&A box, and we'll see that we can answer all or some of them after the interaction which we will have right now. So this is the active invitation to the audience to please raise your questions in the Q&A box. Let us begin now. And Mr. Dinesh, you will allow me to start with the lady on the panel, I guess?
Of course, please.
So, Ms. Santos, first question to you. The Port of Antwerp has been fully operational during the lockdown and has been a lifeline for not just Belgium, but more broadly for Europe in movement of goods. My question to you is, what is your assessment of the extent to which European companies have been impacted by the pandemic? And how do you see their recovery in the next few months? Do you also see an impact on consumption in Europe and on cargo flows in general? Please.
Thanks. Good morning, good afternoon, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today talking about EU-India relationship is always very good, and I miss India, I have to say, very, very dearly. So to your question, your first question, Luc, I think we are still trying to recover from the crisis. This is clear. We know that we will have a contraction of growth in Europe of around 14%, but that's the average. So we have countries where this contraction is much bigger, 22%, for instance, in Spain, or 19% in France. So the 14% is really, in any case, a very high number. And we know also that the EU is doing everything to bring a new stimulus to the economy. We are still trying to find an agreement to bring the money back to the companies, because this will be important. And we know as well that in many cases, countries are still in partial lockdown right now, like it is Belgium in a way. Well, we are working, of course, but not all the activities are on, and this is a bit going around in Europe. So we have not left yet the crisis. We are not as worse as we were in the months of March, but we are still trying to recover. Now, what are the main, or were the main problems, and now are a bit better? Logistics clearly was an issue, because the initial reaction across Europe and in many cases, in many countries around the world, was let's close the borders. This gives us a sense of security. We close the borders, we stop also exports of products that are critical to fight the pandemic. You know, the problems we had with the masks, with medical equipment. So a lot of export restrictions were introduced, and this created additional bottlenecks in the market. And of course, in terms of transport, yes, the port of Antwerp was working, but we had huge problems in Europe in road transport because of the closure of borders, because sometimes the borders were not closed, but you had huge queues. So the Commission had to intervene to bring what we call the green lanes and try to speed up the procedure. So this helped, but we also find out that it's important, for instance, right now, still today, that we use more the digital tools to facilitate the transactions, the customs operations within Europe and outside Europe as well. And this is one of the requests that came out of this crisis. The other one is we still don't have the air traffic normal, operating in the normal way. Of course, we know that you have cargo operators, but the normal airlines, they also transport a lot of cargo, and this is not working as it should. So there's still problems. Some of the costs of transporting goods are still higher than they were before. So we still need to address these problems. I think the other issue that we face, and I would end my initial intervention there, is of course making sure that the workers feel safe in the workplace. I think this was one of the big questions once companies start operating again. And it's again another issue, is you need to put in place a number of conditions to make sure that your workers feel safe, that they continue to operate and your company continues to produce. So these are still challenging situations. And of course, as you mentioned, consumption has resumed a bit when we left the lockdown. But now we expect again that we will have some downturn of consumption, also because, for instance, restaurants, bars in many countries are closing. So this would be my initial remarks.
Hey, thank you very much. Just picking on one thing, we had positive experience from the port with due to the concept of the green lanes. So on the borders, we saw a good impact of that measure to reduce waiting times for trucks at borders. You seem to be a little bit more skeptical about.
I think the measure was very, very good, and we actually thought that it was very timely. The problem is you still have in some cases issues with digital documents, not necessarily within the EU, but with other countries. If we have again, and I mean, there's always a tendency for countries to act unilaterally. I hope now this tendency will be less. But if the situation gets worse again, and we have an increase in the second wave of the virus, our big concern is that we have again countries trying, to do a bit what they did before, and we could eventually face the same problems. Hopefully not. But the strong emphasis from us is on coordination, and of course the Commission here has been very important. But I have to say we also created a very good contact with the Commission to make sure that the problems that were appearing in the internal market and also outside of Europe were addressed in a timely manner. This helped as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for this interesting introductory thoughts already. Let's have more or less the same question to you, Mr. Dinesh. In the month of May, you highlighted that COVID-19 would have a significant impact for the first 2 quarters and would last beyond the 3rd quarter, with some pickup happening by the 4th. What is your assessment today? Do you think that the lack of movements across borders impacts consumption in India and in international trade particularly?
Yeah, thank you. Morning and good afternoon to people. And I think it's a very laudable initiative in terms of doing this. So my congratulations to the port and you, because the first one was very interesting. Now happy to be part of the second one. I think I'm actually happy that I was proved wrong, if I can use that word. Because actually what happened is that the first quarter was very bad, but I think the second quarter, maybe because of the sheer intensity of the lockdown which happened in India, I think did rebound back quite strongly. And interestingly enough, I would say that at least the sectors across the board, and I'm not speaking just about auto, but also about various other manufacturing as well as consumption, did go up, especially towards the latter part of the second quarter. But having said that, I think there is quite a bit of uncertainty still around. I think we have had what we call as localized lockdowns, which I'm hearing also is happening in Europe and UK. But as we speak, I think things are definitely far better than what we thought it would be, both from the production side as well as from the consumption side. That's India per se. The second point of the global trade and really what's happening, I think it's very sector specific if you really look at it. I think already Ms. Santos mentioned about the problem with air capacity, air cargo capacity. And I think more and more, if you really look at it, I think the demand is there, especially for exports out of India and to a certain extent even for imports coming into India. But I think the challenge is the visibility of the supply chain and being able to make it available exactly on time is still a big issue. So I don't think it has affected consumption, but it has definitely not really helped in terms of increasing the growth or the rate of growth, is the way I would look at it. My final comment on this would be, I think there are still sectors which have been obviously impacted quite severely thanks to this. So the pain of those sectors, are we going to feel it down the road, is a question which I think is still to be answered. I would hazard a guess and say, yes, the pain may not be as bad as we thought, but I think it's not going to be just hunky-dory going forward, that it's like, a high growth curve which we are on. So we have to still keep a watch out in terms of what the future is going to hold for us. But I don't see India-Europe trade, or for that matter, within India business activity, so dramatically affected as we thought it would be.
Okay. So a mixed, but I hear a positive undertone. That's wonderful.
Yes.
One additional question here. In Europe, there have been many authorities and also some private companies have allowed deferral of payment. In India, how is the cash flow situation in general? Is there a problem?
Yes. So I think the good news has been that, again, it has not been as bad as we feared it would. I think April, May were very, very tough. I think what has happened is companies which have had relationship with their vendors, companies who have had good relationship with their partners, if I can use that word, have managed to come much better out of the situation. But having said that, I think the small and medium sector still have issues, especially in the logistics play, in terms of getting their cash flow cycle established. It's not that they don't have access to cash, but the cycle is not, uniform. So I think if I look at global trade, I think it's not so bad. But if I look at people who are doing domestic business, especially the startup funding for getting out back into the supply chain, I think has been having issues. But again, it's not as bad as it was, as we feared it would be, considering the tightness of the situation in April and May. Having said that, I think the cycle is still not come back to normal. So we will, the larger companies and also the cash-rich companies, as well as the government and the banks, would have to work hand in hand to make sure we don't run into cash flow issues, especially if I look at it from the small and medium sector. And if I look at, say, a transport sector, there was a moratorium available till almost of October of this year. So I think starting now is when they have to restart their payment cycle, etc., to the finance companies and the banks. And I think there would be some issues going forward in this quarter, but I believe that we should come out of it hopefully by next quarter.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Ms. Santos. Question about the impact of COVID on re-engineering the supply chain. So there was a thought process that COVID-19 would put an end to globalization and would have a big impact on free trade, perhaps bringing production back to Europe and encourage us to be less dependent on suppliers in China or India. You as the lady of free trade agreement, what is your take on this?
Well, we did have a problem of supply and demand. We had a huge shock, but this is because you had a crisis where you had a surge in demand and not enough supply. So it's normal that you're going to have bottlenecks. The problem is these bottlenecks, I already explained before, were exacerbated because some countries start putting export controls. I mean, we had issues with India on paracetamol, but we also had issues inside the EU itself. We start having countries not allowing masks or personal protective equipment to go out of their borders. And that's, again, to give citizens the impression that you are making sure that they have what they need. So it is a normal reaction, but it's one that should not happen in the future. Now, how to ensure that this is not going to happen in the future? I don't think anyone can be 100% sure, because in the future you can have a problem in another area where you again going to face an issue of supply and demand. So bringing back production is not a solution to the problem. And moreover, it's not possible in many cases, especially in Europe. I mean, we have high costs in a number of areas. So producing in Europe is not cost competitive, and it's not desirable. We need to make sure that we import as well to be able to be more competitive in some of our exports. So this idea of reshoring all production as a way to control and avoid future shocks is not a good idea. We also think that the reality is companies on the ground know best how to invest and where to invest. It's not up to the governments to tell companies, oh, now you're going to invest everything in Europe or you're going to invest everything in India. I mean, it depends on the business case of the company and what the company produces and the market the company has. My final point is, I think what is important is that we try in some cases maybe to build more diversification of supply chains, more ways of sourcing, also more markets. For in our point of view, this is a plea actually in favor of more trade, in favor of finding new markets where we can import, but also where we can export. So contrary to this idea that we need to build walls, what we are saying is that we need to create more opportunities and we need to do more trade agreements. That's our answer. And of course, together with this, we need to ensure that we have the best competitive conditions, either in India or in Europe, for the companies that are here, that they can stay. I think this would be my initial remarks. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's really in line with also how we feel this will progress. There won't be reshoring if it's not competitive, and that's absolutely true. And we are better off with trade. I like the sentence you put prior to the webinar. I'm going to read it to the audience because I found it a great sentence. You mentioned in the preparation, we will not be able to win the current health and economic challenge by turning inward and resorting to protectionism. That's a fantastic sentence. I think the audience...
I mean, we should not be populists and we should not look for an easy answer. And many are are now very used to look for easy answers, but of course the business community has to think in a different way, because we are investing and these investments need to be sustainable. They cannot be done just in the whim. You need to make sure that the investment really stands and makes sense.
Ms. Santos, thank you very much for this plea for free trade. It's heartwarming. I hope also some important people on the other side of the Atlantic is listening to our webinar or get some feedback here.
Yeah.
So Dinesh, to the Indian perspective, how do you see India benefiting from the crisis? What could be the positive impact in view also of these supply chains and free trade?
No, actually, I think India definitely should be one of the biggest beneficiaries in terms of what I would call the potential opportunities to resource. And I think there are two elements to this. One, I think like both of you pointed out, I think it's absolutely essential that we become competitive and we are capable enough to be able to be one of those beneficiaries in this resourcing of global supply chains, right? I think the second, which I think is even more important, which I think is where we'll have to work on, is making sure that we are competitive with our logistics costs. In fact, I think that's one of the biggest issues which we have heard many investors who want to come into India for setting up a sourcing hub talk about, in terms of it's not just about doing business in India, which I think people assume is difficult, but I think it's not so. We have improved significantly in terms of the ease of doing business in the recent past. And I think it's also a reality at the ground level. But we have to work on streamlining the supply chain and the logistics cost and making sure we have visibility right across the supply chain. And I think, in fact, one of the points which was mentioned about by Ms. Santos was the digital link, which I think is something which I think we in India are now very serious about. And I think you would have heard about the new national logistics portal, which the government is talking about doing. But I think what is going to be important is private sector to private sector start speaking to each other, the ports to the freight community, and to the great extent, the user community directly linking themselves with the supply chain providers, so that really documents and what I would call electronic paperwork becomes the norm rather than one-off examples which all of us quote about. So to come back to the point, I think the opportunity from both a manufacturing side as well as existing traditional sectors of where India have been quite strong, whether it be in textiles or in pharma or elsewhere, I see a lot of opportunity of being part of the global supply chain. But it's going to be how do we differentiate ourselves digitally, and using technology is going to be the big change for reducing costs.
I'll come back on the digital thing a bit later, if you allow me, because that's also an interesting one we should discuss. Ms. Santos, from your European viewpoint, let's have a look at this India-EU relationship in economic terms. How important is India to the EU, and what more can India and the EU be doing to enhance the trade and other strategic ties?
Well, I think there's always more to be done. India is currently the EU's 10th largest trading partner, while the EU is India's largest trading partner, together with the US and China. So we have more to do, and we have more to do even in the area of investment. So not just direct trade, but also investments. We were discussing a possibility of doing a free trade agreement. Unfortunately, negotiations are stalled for a long time. But I think we can do, even without a free trade agreement, we can still do more. I mean, we have an investment facilitation agreement, and that's very good. It dates from 2017. I think we still need to make it more known across Europe and use it better. Customs procedures is an issue, and there comes again the question of digitalization and the question of logistics. For instance, we have customs cooperation with India, but we don't have a trusted traders program as we have, for instance, with China or the US, where we have equivalents for trusted traders, and this makes life easier for most of the bigger operators in India and Europe. So it's an area where I think we can work on. The other area is standards. We know that we have different rules in India and in Europe, but in some areas we should try to work a little bit better to try to recognize each other's standards and therefore simplify a little bit the costs for companies.
There is a willingness to do this? Is there a willingness to do this, to share more the standards? And
I think there is a willingness to do. I mean, we have several dialogues between EU and India. Sometimes these are not, or have not been producing the results as fast as we wanted them to produce. I mean, we had one on textiles, for instance. But I think there is a case for it, because it is what I think it's important, and this is something, a mentality still in India, in my view, is that India still recognizes that imports are not good in general. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but in general. And this is something that needs to change. I'm not saying in Europe we don't think the same way sometimes. We also think that imports are not necessarily good. But we have realized more and more that you need to import as well to become competitive in certain areas where you are actually adding value. So if India wants to differentiate more and have more value and more differentiation to its products and services, it's also important that India opens up a little bit more in terms of imports. And this is not just cheap, it's also about high technologies and products where India for the moment might not have the best or the state of the art, but could potentially have it in future. For instance, in all the areas have to do with with renewables or climate change, where the EU has a know-how, and there is a common interest, I think, from the EU and India to cooperate. So digital area, IT, where India is also a great advantage, we know it around the area of Bangalore. Why not do more and continue the cooperation also in this area? So I think it's a question of willingness as well, and better know the markets. India is a continent, so it's sometimes very difficult for smaller companies, especially, to work in India.
Ms. Santos, thank you for being so open. Mr. Dinesh, can I have an immediate reaction to the last thoughts of Ms. Santos about, the mentality? I also, when we hear Make in India, self-reliance, it feels a bit like falling back on itself. Please react.
I mean, I would agree and disagree, right? So the agree side is that, yes, I think in the past, I think the thought process always was imports means country is weak, right? That's always a thought. But having said that, I think the self-reliance or, making in India, etc., are all actually slogans which reflect something very different from, I think, what has been maybe made out as fearing imports. In fact, it's the opposite. I think from at least the Prime Minister's view, his thought is India should actually be part of the global supply chain. In fact, he had one speech during the COVID time when they announced the package for the COVID. And I think I was just counting, he mentioned India being part of the global supply chain 7 times in a half-an-hour speech. So, if you really look at it, I think India as a country and as private sector, I would say even the government recognizes that we need to be global in our outlook. In fact, the biggest challenge which I think the Make in India program or the Atmanirbhar program is actually building on is to make India cost competitive, is to make India part of the global supply chain by being self-reliant, not necessarily saying we don't like imports. Having said that, I think the reverse is also true. I think India needs investments more and more for improving its own, so to say, ability to be competitive in the global market. Therefore, I think the process of inviting overseas investment into India and using that as a base for, again, exporting back or for that matter, being consumed in India is, I think, how you should see this self-reliance program rather than look at it as being anti-imports. Let me finish by saying that as you know, India had a history of, balance of payments, of having issues with regard to, managing import payments, etc. No more is it true. I mean, today we are sitting on huge cash flow surplus in terms of, dollars. So I think it's a reverse. While we will have the need to be, so to say, watchful on allowing imports of anything and everything. But I think it's a short-term knee-jerk reaction considering what is happening in the rest of the world for us to say, oh no, we are against imports. So I think I would like to reassure Ms. Santos that I don't think that's the way the private sector or the government sees it long-term. Yes, there would be pockets which always speak about it, but I don't think it's something which is inherent in the culture or in the thinking.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that your ambassador is being ambassador now also for a free trade in both directions. Ms. Santos, does this give you a feeling of comfort, or do you want to add some comment?
No, I think it is important for the Make It in India strategy to fully work, and we know it has attracted more investments, but we also want to invest more in India, and it is important that investors feel that indeed the idea is to produce in India, but also to be able, if needed be, to import from our companies around the world. I mean, this is how it works. It's how it develops so well in other parts of the world. So I think that message needs to be passed clearly to the investors, and this is important if India is really serious about attracting more investments. And then we can talk about all the rest, but I think also here the government has been going in the right direction. I mean, the GST was a major revolution, and it really helped a lot. So, but there's still a lot of issues with transport, with infrastructure, but we all know about that. But I think there are some good steps in the right direction, and that is to create a more environmental friendly environment for companies, not just foreigners, but also Indian, I think.
Ms. Santos, Mr. Dinesh, thank you so much for this interaction. I hope it echoes to the right levels of authorities in India and Europe. Thank you. Mr. Dinesh, a few words on technology and digitization. You said it's no more relevant for supply chain companies to be tech-enabled. The need is for supply chain companies to differentiate themselves through tech-led innovations and to be an integral partner with their customers. Curious to understand better what you meant with this and how your company is actually translating this into action plans.
I mean, I will just start with the first statement, which I think Ms. Santos made of standards and, being able to be digitally engaged across, right? So if I look at today as a supply chain company, typically, I would say most parts of the world, people will come and say, I have a physical service availability and I can produce it or I can provide it at the lowest cost. And can we work together as the best partner? I think that's no more the reality as we speak for 2-3 reasons. One, I think there is disintermediation taking place even on the supply chain side. And if you really want to be a player of relevance in today's world, I think you have to engage with the customer in a very different way. And what is it that if you speak with most customers, and I'm now speaking about whether it's a small scale, what we call SME customer to a very large consumer or a user of services. And typically they would come back and say, for me, it's being just in time at the lowest cost with having the maximum visibility. And now the latest addition is without having anybody in my office doing anything other than actually, seeing the product delivered or the services delivered with the least of hassle from my side. If we are to do that, I think there's only one solution, which is how digitally enabled you are. And like I said, what is the innovation you are doing in terms of the lowest cost? Because obviously we have heard of supply chain companies which invest billions of dollars on IT technology solutions, but then they are not able to be interacting or linked with the small players because the cost becomes too high. So for me, actually the differentiation, and again, I repeat this, it could be, with the ports, it could be with the feeder services for global operations, it could be for, airline linking, or it could be with a pure humble solution for a customer where he or she is able to understand what are the different options available, what are the costs, what is going to be the service levels which I'm going to get to actual physical delivery taking place. For me, the physical delivery taking place is now hygiene. So what is going to be a differentiator? It is the technology and the tool which you use, and is it low cost enough? So if I'm just picking an example, at least what we have been trying to work on, to say today, if the cost was, let us say, 100 for delivering something to a different location, can I actually make the total cost? And I'm not speaking about just the transport cost, right? Obviously, that's not going to change. But if you look at it, the total cost, can I make that 100, let us say 50 or 60? Because it should be a huge difference because I am actually digitally enabling the whole solution and making it visible for the end user or the producer of services or the consumer of services. So I think that is what I mean by innovation through digital. I think what people mistake is that it means that you're going to bring in a new IT system. I don't mean that. I'm saying, can we digitize the process by using the standardization techniques, which we normally do in any process improvement philosophy?
Thank you. That's a clarification. Thank you. One more question on to your company. I see you have developed tremendously. This can only be done if you understand your customer very well. This customer centricity, something we in our port, we also hold close to our heart. That's why we have developed a huge warehousing capacity in the port, allowing to add value to products and being close to the European market. Recently, we have even dedicated a specific area for investments of circular economic activity. So companies that are going to invest in a circular instead of a linear production process, again, close to the market. How do you feel this kind of thoughts about being very close to your customer? Is that a part of the success of TVS or is it elsewhere?
Yeah, in fact, I would say that's the only success of TVS. And you're perfectly right. I think the new normal global supply chain is going to be where people are looking at nearshoring, but not necessarily near producing. So I think what COVID has taught us is that you need safety being built into your supply chain. You need visibility being built into your supply chain. You need, if I can use that word, emergency provisions being built into your supply chain, right? So if you look at, and I think that's exactly what you in the port is also doing. If you really look at it and say that I have a service provider who actually looks at what's happening across my system and make sure that they have products available in a location, in a place where I can get it at the least hassle. And I'm not talking about cost now, but the least hassle when in case of a redundant situation arises. I think if you look at what happened in January when COVID struck China and the rest of the world started kind of catching cold, forget COVID coming on board, but the supply chain started collapsing. I think people started looking at it as a high risk point. I think that has now opened up the opportunity in terms of saying that whether it is going to be storage or is it going to be visibility, and how do I do it at selected locations across different continents, across different countries, as the case may be. I mean, Europe is one if I really look at it. And of course, I don't know, the UK is now part of Europe, but at least definitely the Europe continent, I think can be seen as one point where I think the efforts like what you are doing will make a difference for companies who are both usage of those services and also for those who want to be able to have that nearshoring available.
Thank you. You used the word UK. That easily brings me to you, Ms. Santos. It seems like you get along very well on this, despite the distance. This is an excellent exchange and going one to the other. Ms. Santos, you are the chair of the EU-UK task force within Business Europe. Today everything is about Brexit. So we'd love to have your thoughts on Brexit now, but especially on will Brexit affect the India-EU ties, and how do you see these relations between UK, India, Europe? How is Brexit playing there?
Well, I can never escape this Brexit issue. It's terrible and it's so negative because it is negative. I mean, let's put it clearly. We have full economic, political integration, and now we are going to either nothing or something that is really, really very, very low as compared to what we have today. So whatever the result is, it's always going to be negative. And I think this would be my first comment. Then, of course, now we have the whole uncertainty that we are about 2 months from the day of the end of the transition period. So until now, not much has happened yet. So the real Brexit, you're going to feel it by the end of this year, by the 31st of December. That's when you're going to feel it. And we are 2 months before that day, and we don't know if we are going to have a deal or not. They are not even talking at the moment. So we are in this limbo situation. That is what business doesn't like. We want certainty, we want clarity, and this is all that we don't have at the moment. So what will be the consequences also for India? I mean, in any case, it's going to be more difficult and more costly to serve the European market if you are located in the UK. This is going to be the reality. Even if we have an agreement, we know that there will be extra costs. Even if we have no duties, even if we have no quotas, we will have customs checks. We will need to have different labels. We will need to have different tests and certificates. So all these would add to the costs that companies have. And then there's a whole range of areas that are not, for the moment, known. I mean, will we have a way to continue cooperation in the future? How will we be able to move the workers between companies, for instance, between a UK company or an European company, if you have investments in the two sides? So all these are uncertainties. What is going to happen with logistics? What is going to happen with all the trucks in the UK coming to Europe? Will be they staying in Kent? What is going to happen? So all this it's a big issue in terms of uncertainty, and frankly, I will be very open. We've been told by politicians on both sides, you need to prepare. And companies have been hearing this for ages. You need to prepare. Fine, we are trying to prepare. But how can you prepare, or you fully prepare, if you don't know in the end what will be the final result? It's not the same to prepare for a duty or to prepare for no duty. It's not the same to prepare for having, you know, the possibility of recognizing the tests that you do in the EU, in the UK, and vice versa, or not having this possibility. So it's very difficult for companies to prepare. But in any case, even if we are in the best possible scenario, this is not going to be positive. And for companies, I think for Indian companies, there is also another, and this will be my last comment, important element, is that you are going to face rules of origin that will determine whether your product is made in the UK or not. We know that a lot of UK companies are importing products from India to be transformed in UK and sold all over Europe. We think that the rules of origin, in many cases, will not allow this operation to continue as it is today, meaning that the product in the end will be considered as Indian. So you will have to face duties, the same level of duties that you are facing if you are importing directly from India. So these are just some of the elements that could potentially change. Either we have a deal or no deal.
Thanks for the honest answer, and sorry for raising the question. I know you must be getting crazy of all these guys and girls addressing you on Brexit. Sorry for that.
No, but it's good to talk because there's a lot of misinformation going around. So I think it's important to clarify and to bring the facts to the discussion. So yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Before going to the audience, Mr. Dinesh, you want to have a last comment also on Brexit? We need to give also the Indian side a chance to say a few words on Brexit, I think. But if you don't want, you can say no.
No, I will. And I think also, if I can say that, sitting on the other side of the fence, because as you said, we do have a strong presence in UK. And like Ms. Santos said, we do also have operations in Europe, which will get affected as we speak. So, in fact, even yesterday, I was on a late night call with my team trying to understand what we should plan for. And I think, like Ms. Santos is saying, nobody knows what to plan for, I think, which is the biggest issue which we in the private sector will face. But sitting in India, I think the 2 points which Ms. Santos made, I think, are very relevant for us. We need to understand what's going to happen when we route things via UK, or vice versa, meaning where it goes to Europe and then goes into UK. So I think both from the production side and as a supply chain company, I think these are issues which worry us, to use the word. And what does it mean for a no-deal Brexit? What does it mean for a, some form of an agreement or understanding, which we still hope will be reached before December 31st, is something we are all waiting to see. So, I mean, we are, I won't say frustrated, but we are kind of waiting with bated breath for whatever Ms. Santos and the team are going to be working out.
Yeah, we recognize. Thank you so much. Let's have a look at the chat and the question box. I see there are different thoughts, but I guess I see that a lot of them are more like comments, and there have been comments on comments. So I really thank the audience for being actively present. But a question to you, I think, Mr. Dinesh, when talk about digitization, we here in Europe, we face that the confidence and the trust to share the data is a big issue. So the question is, what about your preparedness and your experience in India to share data with other stakeholders just to achieve this visibility on the entire supply chain?
Correct. I think that is the biggest concern, if I can use that word, even in India, right? But having said that, I think this is B2B and B to small b we are speaking of. And I think, therefore, there is an ability to get the trust of the user in terms of sharing data. And what we have found is, as long as you're able to build in the firewalls required to be able to share that information only exclusively for the benefit or for the usage of that particular customer or for that particular user, then I think we are able to find solutions around it. But what we have done is built in huge amounts of safeguards. I mean, as you know, with the data protection laws coming on board across all the globe, I think we are now spending maybe more of our time, effort, and money to make sure that we are not only compliant with what is written in the law, but also much more in spirit with how we practice it. So I think it's surmountable, especially in India, provided you're B2B and B2 small b. But when you get to B2C, I think you will have too many big challenges. And it is, if at all, whatever you use has to be with specific permissions being built in.
Thank you. That's a clear answer there. There is another question. I don't know, perhaps it's too technical, but let me raise it. Somi Hazari requests, can phytosanitary inspections both in the EU and India be done at the port of loading instead of destination? I think it would be great if that could be possible, but I don't know if you want to comment on this, Mr. Dinesh, Ms. Santos.
Ms. Santos, you want to go first? Yeah.
Maybe I'll start. I think the question is a bit what I said. It depends on whether you have some sort of cooperation and you recognize the authorities that are doing the inspection from the perspective of the country where the good is going. So that's why it is important that, and especially with sanitary and phytosanitary measures, where you have a lot of issues with the consumer is very concerned, you need to ensure that you have some good mutual understanding of the entity that is doing the inspection. And this is also the question of, trustworthy, but also whether the governments themselves trust each other and the local authorities to do this. So it's one of the areas where I think we still need to work together more between India and Europe.
I just want to add to this point, which I think is, I agree with what Ms. Santos said, but I think the thought process is that we start with a doubt, right? So I think the solution, again, in my mind, has got to be that either both the countries or the countries concerned agree to work together with one service provider who is trusted by both of them, which I think is a big task, but I think that's maybe one workable solution. The second is to create a digital proof of the inspection or the documentation having taken place in the right way. And can it be uploaded? Like, I'll give you a simple example. How did this passenger manifest start getting uploaded in advance, what they call advance clearance of the passenger, right? So in the same way, can that happen with these goods? I think it's complex, but if somebody thinks it through, I think it can be done. So it's theoretically possible. Practically, it has to go back to what Ms. Santos said. There has to be trust and there has to be an agreement that we have one common service provider.
Thank you. Very clear. This I just read because I love this one. Say Mr. Somiazari says we are looking at Antwerp as a center for importing frozen processed foods and exporting our teas and agricultural products. It's the best choice, Mr. Hazari. Just go for it and it will work. Ms. Santos, practical question on Business Europe. How is Business Europe, or how can Business Europe support Indian firms?
Well, we represent the whole companies that are present in Europe. That's the main priority for us. So we even represent companies that are not of European origin, but that have huge investments in Europe and therefore are considered for legal reasons European. We have, for instance, a group of corporate members that basically are big companies as well. And we have TCS there, so Data Consultant Services, but we also have ArcelorMittal, for instance. But we have a number of Indian companies that are present across Europe that are also members of our member federations. MEDEF in France, FEB in Belgium. So all this is how we represent them. In a way, a company, when it's in Europe, it becomes European, even if the basis is in India. Overall, I would say that we are all working in benefit of also Indian companies, because we are trying to make sure that we have the best conditions for companies to do business in Europe. Either they are European or foreigners, and we are pro free trade, so we're not protectionist. We believe that, as I said already in the beginning, we need to import to be able to export. So I think this is also beneficial for Indian companies.
Okay. Perhaps one more question for you, Ms. Santos. Countries like Japan, they have given incentives, I'm reading the question here, to its companies to move out of China and reconsider setting up a destination such as India or Bangladesh. Is there any effort on the part of your Business Europe to advocate something like this to the EU?
No, I mean, I think I was pretty clear. We think that this is a decision that needs to be taken by the companies, not the governments. And the fact is that even if you give money for companies to invest, it still needs to be a business case behind it. I mean, because the money will disappear, and if the business doesn't stand in the medium to long term, what's the point? So you need to think that the investments are investments that take, you know, an average in the industrial sector over at least 10 years. And for this to make sense, you need to have a market. So we are not defending this idea because we think this idea has to be developed by the companies, not the governments. It's not up to the governments to decide when and where to invest. It's the companies.
Again, a clear answer. Thank you so much. We are getting to the end of our time slot, and we really want to respect everybody's time. So I'm going to, because there are still a lot of questions, but we can't do that. It will take us too long. I thank again the audience for such an active interaction. But of course, above all, I want to thank our two speakers. In the beginning, I said we have two remarkably interesting and appropriate speakers. I think we all agree, everybody in this webinar, and especially myself, that these words are absolutely correct. Mr. Dinesh, Ms. Santos, you have been wonderful interlocutors for this webinar. I think, and it was extremely interesting to have very clear and open answers to the different questions. So thank you very, very much, and allow me to wish you all success in your further endeavors. Hope to see you in life the coming months once we are allowed to leave our country and our offices. So really thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time and your know-how and experience and openness during this webinar. Thank you very, very much. And also the audience. So as I mentioned, thank you very much. This is not the end of the story. We encourage you all to join us on our third episode, which will be November the 20th. We promise to be back there with two interesting and noteworthy guests. We already have the names, but we are not going to disclose it yet. Let that be the surprise. We will share the communication to you shortly, so you will get the names. Please do join us on our third webinar as well, and have a good continuation of your day. It was pleasant to be together here on this webinar. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
So Dinesh, Ms. Santos, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Dinesh. Thank you, Ms. Santos. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you, Malini.